Fear has a strange way of returning. You can run from it for years. You can bury it beneath success. You can distract yourself with work, responsibilities, achievements, and time. But eventually, fear finds its way back. And when it returns, it often arrives stronger than before. Jacob was learning that lesson now. The messenger's words echoed inside his mind again and again. Esau is coming. 400 men are with him. 400. The number refused to leave his thoughts. Not because it was large, because of what it meant. Nobody traveled with 400 men for a family reunion. Nobody gathered 400 men for a friendly conversation. This sounded like an army, a force, a reckoning. And suddenly the future Jacob had spent decades building felt fragile, very fragile. His wives, his children, his servants, his livestock, his wealth. Everything could disappear in a single day. For years he had feared this moment. Now it was here. And perhaps that is what makes fear so exhausting. Often the event itself is not what destroys us. It is the anticipation, the waiting, the imagining, the endless scenarios created inside our minds, the battle before the battle. Jacob's mind became a battlefield. What if Esau wanted revenge? What if 20 years had not softened his anger? What if the betrayal still burned inside him? What if tomorrow was the day everything ended? The fear became so overwhelming that Jacob began making plans immediately, dividing his camp, separating his family, creating backup strategies, preparing for disaster. If Esau attacks one group, perhaps another can escape. If the worst happens, perhaps someone survives. It was practical, logical, reasonable. Yet beneath every strategy lived a deeper truth. Jacob still struggled to trust. That struggle had followed him throughout his entire life. Even after God's promises, even after God's provision, even after countless blessings, fear still whispered louder than faith. And perhaps many people understand exactly what that feels like. Because fear rarely disappears simply because God speaks once. Sometimes God must teach the same lesson repeatedly, not because he has failed, because transformation takes time, especially for people who have spent years protecting themselves. That night, Jacob did something he had not done in a long time. He prayed, not casually, not routinely, desperately. The kind of prayer that emerges when human solutions begin running out. The kind of prayer that strips away religious performance. The kind of prayer born from genuine need. Listen carefully to Jacob's words. For perhaps the first time in Scripture, we see him differently. Not as a manipulator, not as a strategist, not as a deceiver, but as a frightened man, a vulnerable man. A man finally confronting his limitations. He reminded God of his promises, not because God had forgotten, because Jacob needed to remember. Sometimes prayer is less about informing God and more about anchoring ourselves, reminding ourselves of what is true when fear tries to rewrite reality. But even after praying, the fear remained. And that is important. Because many people assume prayer should instantly remove anxiety. Yet Scripture often presents a different picture. Sometimes prayer begins a process, not an immediate solution. Sometimes peace arrives gradually. Sometimes fear lingers while faith grows. And Jacob still had a long journey ahead. The night deepened. The camp settled. Children slept. Animals quieted. The stars spread across the sky. Yet Jacob could not rest. How could he? Tomorrow might change everything. Tomorrow he would face the brother he betrayed. Tomorrow he would confront a past he never truly escaped. Tomorrow he might lose everything, and perhaps for the first time in decades. Jacob began seeing himself clearly, not the image he presented to others, not the successful patriarch, not the wealthy leader. The real man underneath, the frightened man, the guilty man, the man still haunted by old choices, Because there is something terrifying about silence. When distractions disappear, truth becomes harder to avoid. During the day, activity keeps us occupied. Responsibilities keep us moving. Noise fills our minds. But at night exposes things. Night reveals wounds. Night forces conversations we spend years avoiding. And Jacob's greatest wound was not Esau. It was Jacob himself. For years he had outrun consequences, outrun confrontations, outrun difficult truths. But now there was nowhere left to run. The river Jabbok stood before him, and beyond it, his future. But first, he would have to cross something even more difficult, his own heart. One by one, Jacob sent his family ahead. Imagine that scene. The darkness, the quiet movement of people crossing the river, children being guided carefully, servants carrying supplies, loved ones disappearing into the shadows, until eventually, Jacob stood alone, completely alone. The Bible gives this detail with astonishing simplicity. Jacob was left alone. Only 5 words, yet perhaps they are among the most important words in the entire story, because God often does his deepest work when people are alone. Not because loneliness is pleasant, because solitude removes hiding places. There were no servants now, no family, no distractions, no audience, no reputation to protect, no image to maintain. Only Jacob and God. Though Jacob did not know that yet. The air felt different. The night felt heavier, as if something unseen was approaching. The wilderness around him remained silent, yet internally, a storm raged. Perhaps memories flooded his mind. His father Isaac, his brother Esau, his mother Rebekah. The deception, the lies, the years, the regrets, the things he wished he could undo. The conversations he wished he could revisit. The choices he wished he could change. And perhaps that is what happens before transformation. Before God changes a person's future, he often brings them face to face with their past, not to condemn them, to free them. Because healing cannot happen where denial survives. Jacob had spent years surviving, years building, years accumulating, years striving, but now God was preparing to address something deeper: identity. Who was Jacob really? Not what he possessed, not what he achieved, not what others thought. Who was he beneath everything? The answer to that question would change history. The wind moved through the darkness. The river flowed quietly nearby. The stars watched overhead. And somewhere in that darkness, unseen footsteps were drawing closer. Jacob could not hear them yet, could not recognize them yet, could not understand what was about to happen. He thought tomorrow would be his greatest battle. He was wrong. His greatest battle would begin tonight. Not against Esau, not against an army, not against circumstances, against God himself. And by the time the sun rose, Jacob would never be the same man again.